there's common experiences of near-death experiences. So heightened senses, people seeing a tunnel and the light, loved ones, Jesus shows up commonly, certain feelings that people have. Like there's these common experiences people have. How do those compare and contrast with a hellish, distressing near-death experience?
Sure. Well, in the hellish experiences, and I'll just read off Margot Gray described distressing experiences, and here are some just little bullet points of the type things they experience. But similar to the positive ones, they believe they have left their body. They believe they have gone to the other side. It is real, if not realer than real, distinguishing them from hallucinations where you wake up from it and say, wow, that sounded real then when I had it, but now I just know it was a hallucination. They actually have common features, unlike hallucinations. So that here are some of the features. Why would there be these common features? Why wouldn't it be just bad feelings or whatever your mind could come up with as far as monsters? Why, if it were a hallucination, wouldn't it just have an almost infinite variety? And yet we find these common features: a feeling of extreme fear or panic, emotional and mental anguish, a great sense of desolation, the brink of a pit, the edge of an abyss, a definite sense of being dragged down by some evil force, visions of wrathful and demonic creatures, intense cold or unbearable hot, sounds that resemble the wailing of souls in torment, fearsome noise. So those are some of the things, some of the characteristics that we see in these negative experiences, and you see why nobody wants to read about these. I want to read the happy stuff,
Oh
and
my
get excited
goodness.
and comfort people about the afterlife. It's not something I want to believe.
Okay, so just for clarity, to make sure we're tracking, is a hallucination or a dream, there's typically a sense of, oh, I know that wasn't real. You can distinguish fact from fiction. But with near-death experiences and hellish near-death experiences, it's not only people are convinced that they're real, but they're convinced that it's almost more real than the world they regularly inhabit. Like these people are convinced that they had these experiences. Is that true?
That's true. And as evidence of that, their life changes as a result. Psychologists look at things that actually produce life change because there aren't a lot of them. But these experiences afterwards, they are very much disturbed. Does this mean I'm going to hell? What do I need to do to stay out of such a place? Some will actually have an experience where they have both distressing and positive elements, such as the one we mentioned from Dr. Ritchie, but some will feel like they've gone to hell. Demons are attacking them. It's painful. It's horrifying. And then they actually look up and call out to God to save them, and he brings them out to the other side. So some actually have both, but they're convinced that this is real, and to show that, their lives change. The typical response is basically repentance. Something in
Wow.
my life, whether they're a believer or not a believer, something needs to change in life is the prima facie response of these things, that this came into my life for some purpose.
Okay, so if angels show up with some frequency, I forget the percentage of people who report them in near-death experiences, how common are demonic type beings in these distressing near-death experiences?
I've not seen anybody give a figure to this, so I just have to plead ignorance on that one. And
Okay.
that's why we need to do more study on them to come up with more percentages as to how these things happen. I do know that it is common. If you look at definitions of distressing experiences, demons will be a part of that experience.
Are there maybe just one or two more accounts? I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I was just looking in your book, reading some of these, just to give people a sense of what those with a hellish near-death experience. I think this is on page 216, and you list 3 or 4 of these. Of course, you could read others, but just give us a sense of kind of the experience of what people actually report when they've had a distressing near-death experience and they're willing to talk about it.
I'll just read some of these off to try to get it
Okay.
right. These are quotes from people who've had them. It's a dusky, dark, dreary area, and you realize that the area is filled with a lot of lost souls. The feeling I got was they were all looking downward. They were all kind of shuffling. There was a kind of moaning. There were hundreds of them looking very dejected. Another one said, a hell is a pit, and there's darkness, but there's also fire. I was in a place to which the Bible refers as outer darkness and is not pretty. As real as this letter is, so is this place. Another one
Mm,
said, I felt my body slipping down. It was cold, dark, and watery. When I reached the bottom, it resembled the entrance to a cave with what looked like webs hanging. The inside of the cave was gray and brown in color. I heard cries, wails, moans, and gnashing of teeth. Another one said, I was led by Jesus from the side of bliss to a side of misery. I did not want to look, but he made me look, and I was disgusted and horrified and scared. It was so ugly. The people were blackened and sweaty and moaning in pain, chained to their spots. So these are horrifying experiences, and you can see why many people would never want to tell anyone else. Near-death experiences, when they're good, people don't want to talk about them for fear that people will think they're crazy or believe in their hallucinations. But imagine you had a terrifying one, how much harder that would be to tell somebody, because it's almost like saying, well, I'm going to hell, to some people that are listening. So they tend to be extremely private about those. They say that those that actually share them, and which may be the reason that some of these cardiologists didn't hear negative experiences when they talk to them after their events, is that number one, the person needs to have gone long enough to where they can process the
okay.
event before they're willing to talk about it. Number two, they're only going to talk about it to someone that they really trust, that they've spent some time with and are willing to share it with. So that 20% is probably on the low side. I
Oh,
would say probably more people have experienced it and just aren't willing to talk about it. Or Dr. Rawlings suggested that there were a few people he talked to who, when they were resuscitated, they talked about this experience and were horrified. But then a few days later, he asked them about it, and they're like, what experience? Apparently, they had just submerged it so deeply inside and didn't want to believe that it happened that they just put it out of their minds.
the closest I can remotely relate to is I remember the movie like 30 years ago, Ghost, and there's a few people that died, and like these dark, shadowy, demonic type beings go and just drag them to a hell type state. And I saw that, if I remember, as roughly a teenager, and that was like a disturbing image. Like, wow, it kind of just took something that was abstract and made it personal. I can still kind of envision that in my mind. I can only imagine for somebody who actually sees that and believes that it's real, how radical that would shift them. Now,
Yeah.
people
And,
you
and
talk,
let me just say that even as you're saying those things, it seems so dark ages. I know we're not supposed to call it the dark ages anymore now that we know more about the Middle Ages, but it just seems like something pre-scientific, something we shouldn't be talking about right now. I do think that the 1900s, late 1800s, the secularism, the materialism that came through, philosophical materialism, has really made cowards of all of us to even talk about these things.
hmm,
And even like when I read Carl Sagan, who wrote Demon Haunted World and things, he doesn't really look at the evidence pro and con in the things that I've read by him. He just kind of assumes that we're past all that because it seems so wild and crazy. So I think we've got to open up our minds and start listening to people when they talk about these experiences and other related evidence for this kind of personal evil on the other side.